So it's a good time to add a bunch of static web page templates to our application. So I'll create a template folder under this web folder to add a bunch of templates into it. And not to waste your time by typing lots of HTML code, I'll just copy and paste 3 HTML files into this folder. The home HTML will be our entry page where we are going to list a bunch of algorithm design questions. And this Houston HTML will be our generic error page that we display to the users when there's a problem with our application. And this subscribe HTML will be our subscription form that will show to the users when we want them to subscribe to our premium content. But first, let's implement our logging initialization and try to make our application build and render a bunch of pages first. I'll go to this init logging function and I'll paste a bunch of code here. And what I paste is not really important actually because it's domain specific, and honestly your typical logging implementation will be likely different than this specific implementation. But conceptually what we do here is to tell our application this UDP address is our log aggregation syslog endpoint, and we are going to push all of our logs through UDP to this paper trail endpoint. So that part is done. Let's get to the funner part and initialize our authenticator that we worked really hard creating a constructor function in the previous part of the series. We'll first construct an authenticator and exit if we have an error. Otherwise, we are going to return the authenticator, and really that's all there is to it. The only thing that is left is this Init Routes section, and for that we'll create a new router and pass an authenticator instance to its constructor, and then listen and serve our web server using that router. And in case there's an error, we are going to log and exit, and if not, we are going to log that we have started serving our content at port 8888. But we have a missing router package, so let's create that one too. I'll create a router folder inside this internal folder again. Then I'm going to add a router.go file inside that folder. Our new function will take an authenticator instance and return an instance to a Gin engine, which is the web framework that we are going to use for our application. But before using Gin, we need to import it. So let's do so, and let's also import a bunch of other stuff that we will need while we are at it. So we'll first go get github.com gingonic/gin for our web framework. We'll go get github.com gincontrib sessions for session support. We'll go get github.com gincontrib sessions mongo for MongoDB session integration. And go get github.com global sign MGO for opening a connection to our MongoDB cluster. We'll create a default Gin router and then add routes and middleware to our router in the middle. And finally, we'll return the router for others to consume it. And here are the first paths that we can serve. The slash will be our context route, which we are going to serve home.html. This slash error will serve the Houston HTML, and slash subscribe will serve our subscription form, which is subscribe HTML. I'll also create this health Z endpoint to act as an AWS ALB ingress health check path for our ingress controller to be able to route traffic to our pods, but let's not get ahead of ourselves. We'll talk more about that later when we get to deploying our application. So let's go back to defining the handler first. So we'll define these handlers for these paths as well. And of course, we'll need to create these packages too. I'll create a handler folder inside this internal folder, and then create separate folders for all of these routes that we have seen. Then I'll add one file for each of these folders to contain our handler code. And the handler function is a higher order function that returns a gin handler function. And a gin handler function is a function that accepts a single gin context parameter as input, and we use that gin context to send our responses to the clients essentially. So in this case, we are rendering this home HTML page with a 200 success status code. We are going to do the same for other pages as well. Houston handler will serve Houston.html, and this subscribe handler will serve subscribe HTML. And for the health Z endpoint, inside instead of rendering an HTML page, we'll simply return a string of OK with a status code of 200 success, and that will tell that our service is up and healthy and it's ready to accept requests. So let's fix this typo as well, and we are off to the races, I guess. We also need to tell the router where our template files are so that it can find them and serve them as HTML. And to do it, we are going to call this router.loadHTML glob method and pass a glob pattern that maps to all of the template files under this web template folder. And we have two more things to do to complete our application. First of all, we need to initialize our session store, and also we need to link it to our authentication provider, which is auth0. But even without these, we can run our application locally and see that it renders some of the static pages. So let's do it. But before that, let's fix this typo too. We are passing this auth variable to this function, not a. And when we run our application, we can see that it's serving under localhost 8888 as expected. And some of the links here will not work yet because we haven't implemented them. The error page that we have, which is houston.html, and also our health probe healthz are working just fine. And actually, I think I'm passing an extra nil argument here to the health probe. So let me go back and fix it real quick. And when we restart the application, we have a cleaner OK response without that added baggage text next to it. So it looks like the static HTML file serving of our application is working just fine. And it's time to implement some session handling to it.